for me and how I have met God many, many times, not within the walls of a building, but out in creation. And that is the way I most authentically, I think, as a human being, relate to God and hear from God. I don't think I know that actually, that is true. And I also want to think about the concept of wilderness today as well, and what wilderness actually means. So that's what we're going for. I'm going to have to do a bit of dashing at first, so do excuse me. Really sorry, people on Zoom, because my laptop is separate from everything else. You can't see my pictures, but you'll get the gist, I'm sure. So, wilderness. So say the word wilderness. Give me some ideas. What do you think of when I say the word wilderness? Any word? Excitement?
Dry land.
Dry land.
Vast.
Vast.
Danger.
Danger.
Barren.
Barren.
Unpredictable.
Unpredictable.
Jesus, 40 days.
Jesus, 40 days.
Moses.
Moses. Adventure. Wild animals. Okay. Great. Really good ideas that you've got there. Yeah. So, and obviously the word wilderness comes up quite a lot in the Bible, doesn't it? Because we've already come up with Jesus and we've come up with Moses. Yeah. This is one of my little favourite spots in the wilderness. This is a place called Glenlicht, which is not very far from my other little home in Scotland. Beautiful place, beautiful river running through very, very high mountains. Really glorious place. So, okay, so we've had Moses, we've had Jesus. Who else can we think of went to the wilderness? John the Baptist, absolutely. Out there with Jesus, yeah. Hagar, absolutely, banished out, went into the wilderness. From the Garden of Eden into the wilderness. How about the entire nation of Israel? Yeah, from Egypt. Do you remember that bit about Elijah? After the whole thing with the prophets of Baal, running away into the mountains, having had this really big spiritual experience, and then suddenly having a complete panic. And when did God speak to him? In the wilderness. Yeah. So we have all those ideas of wilderness, don't we? And the wilderness is there a lot in the Bible. And so I think what I'd like to bring over today is that Jesus had that time in the wilderness after his baptism. And I just want to talk about two little words in Greek. Okay, so there are two words that are used in the Bible for Greek, for in, and in all our English translations, they end up as just being the word in. So when it talks about John baptizing people in the River Jordan, it is in the River Jordan, as in it is in that inner place. We are in Albury Community Centre. That word changes when it becomes Jesus being baptized. And it talks about the Holy Spirit descending on Jesus, but instead of in, it means into. And it talks about Jesus being baptized into the River Jordan. When it talks about Jesus going into the wilderness, it's into the wilderness. And it's a different meaning in the Greek. So in means location, into means part of. Yeah. So we are in Albury Community Church. We are part of Albury Community Church. We're in Albury Community Centre, but we're in Albury Community Church. It's a different sense. It's being part of, being belonging. So what I just want to throw into your heads this morning is the idea of wilderness not being a bad thing. We talk about, don't we, about wilderness years, or being in the wilderness as being an awful place. So when we talks about Jesus going to the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, we think, well, that must have been awful. It must have been really dreadful. He was out there with the wild animals, etc., etc. But Jesus, throughout his life, frequently went back into the mountains, back away from people to pray. It was Jesus' choice to go into those places, because I think that in those natural environments, we find a way in which God speaks to us, which is stripped away from all the other bits of our culture, our society. So if you think about wilderness, it is a place where people are not necessarily there. It's where buildings aren't there. It is where the structures that mankind have made are not there. It is a place which is free of all of those distractions. And therefore, it is a place, I think, where God can really speak to people. And I've been reading an interesting book at the moment that does put over the idea that maybe one of the reasons that when the Israelites first left Egypt and went out into the wilderness is because they needed healing from the trauma of 4,000 years in Egypt being slaves. They needed to have that time out in space, in nature, to know that only God was their provision. And they could only look to him as he did in manna and the fire and the cloud and all the things and the water from the rock. Where did Moses get spoken to? He got spoken to through a burning bush. God uses the natural world to speak to us. Elijah heard the still small voice of God after the hurricane, after the wind. So it's a way that wilderness can actually give us a chance to get out and experience what God might want to say to us. And also it comes down to this idea of what happens is, with all cultures, with whatever happens, we build civilizations. We get ourselves more and more separated from the natural world. I had an experience recently. I went down to London to go and see a play at the theatre with one of my friends. And we had to go via tube, and it was one of those tube journeys where you get on one churn, you go down all the escalators, you get onto the tube, you leave that tube, and then you walk further down and down and down to the next tube, which is the lower below. And as I was walking down, it's just the end of rush hour, there were just hordes of people in these tiny, tiny, tiny tunnels. No fresh air, not a hint of daylight, nothing green, all concrete. And I thought then, I was not made for this. This is not where myself as a human animal is comfortable being. It is unreal. It is entirely man-made. I felt really, really uncomfortable in it. In a way that, and it just made me see again how much more I need to see the sky, I need to see trees, I need to see green things around us. And I could also go on, but I won't go on too much here about this, but with my Kintsugi Hope hat on, and also understanding mental health, there are 101 reasons why being out in green spaces is scientifically proven to be really good for you. Looking at green things does things to your brain. It makes us feel better about things, without a doubt. If you walk in trees, your blood pressure goes down. It really does make a difference. It's why so many people, after you've been out for a walk, you don't know why you feel better, but you actually physically feel better. It is actually good for you. Lots more other ways that nature does that for you. So, having talked about wilderness there, I'm just going to share a few images and Bible verses for you for ways in which I have encountered God in the wilderness or out in nature. And I'd really like to encourage you to do the same. If we have time, we might not share your stories with each other over tea and coffee about ways in which God might have spoken to you out the context of a church building. So, for those of you that can't see it, this is the picture of five very beautiful mountains. These are called the Five Sisters of Kintail. These are literally the mountains at the other end of the loch where my other home is. They look particularly gorgeous, dusted in snow. And here is a verse from Psalm 35. Your steadfast love reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like majestic mountains, and your wisdom like the depths of the sea. And that psalm and that verse has been kind of like a bit of a core part of me for about 30, 40 years, I would have thought, since really early in being a Christian, is being out in nature, being in high places or low places, looking up at mountains. And that verse is just something I repeat often and think of those verses and think of how the psalmist would have been overwhelmed by feeling that awesomeness and that presence of God and could only think of trying to describe it as being like majestic mountains, being like the depths of the sea, being beyond what we can see or understand, how God is very much out of the box. And the only way he could describe it would be to talk about it as the biggest things he could see at the time, the clouds, the depths of the sea. So get yourself out into a wide open space. If it helps, go for Psalm 35, read that and think about what that means. So that's a really helpful one. And I literally do say that often when I'm standing by my lot looking at those mountains, I say those words because it just grounds me and makes me realise that you can see the majesty and awesomeness of God in nature. Some of you might have heard me share about eagles before. So this verse has always been really, again, really personal to me. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wing like eagles. They will walk and not go weary. They will run and not grow faint. I particularly like birds, as some of you might know. And certainly when I was starting to become quite overwhelmed at work and finding myself so stressed by all the cares of being a head teacher, I every now and then used to get a break and go to Scotland, and there is a glen that I know, not the one from the earlier picture, another one, and pretty much guaranteed to see golden eagles up it. And the first time we were walking up it, it's a very steep incline, and I was really bowed down by the thoughts of work because I hadn't been on holiday for only a couple of days and it was still churning around my head. And suddenly this glorious golden eagle soared overhead. And that verse just hit me like a bullet and made me realise that it's an image and it's a symbol for me of how you can still somehow rise above, with God's strength, the difficult things that come your way. So seeing an eagle is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I do encourage you, if you ever have the chance to get into wild country, that any bird will do. All birds are good.
Other birds are available.
Other birds are available, and here is one. So the naturalists amongst you will tell you that that's not a sparrow. Did you know that wasn't a sparrow? Yes, good. I'm glad there is that. Anybody tell me what it is? It's not quite a greenfinch, but around the finch. It is a finch. It's a chaffinch. It's a female chaffinch. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a wee chaffinch with its mouth still full of sunflower hearts. So yes, I do love to feed the birds. But this worth, you are worth more than many sparrows. After I had a complete meltdown at work and had to walk away from the job I loved, 2 days later, I went to the only place I could think of, which was as close to Walden as I could get, which was Wycombe Fen. And I was in a sort of a not particularly coherent state. And I was walking along the boardwalk, and a flock of bearded tits just landed in the reeds next to me. Now, that probably means nothing to you. Let me tell you, I've seen bearded tits at Wycombe Fen twice, and that was one of them. They're just really hard to spot there, indeed. And it was a whole flock of them just tweeting around in the sea heads. And somehow in the middle of my, what have I just done, what is going on in my life, etc., I was just suddenly reminded of whatever else happens, I'm worth more than many sparrows. And that's what I found, is that God can sometimes, when you're not even thinking about anything to do with him, if you put yourself in situations in the natural world, he can get your attention in a way that he can't get in any other way. Even if it's a tiny, tiny thing, just keep your eyes a little bit open and something may come along that just really speaks to you. So yeah, every time I'm at Wycombe Fen, I'm always looking for them again. I've only ever seen them once, ever there again. But anyway, yeah, look out for birds. Bird watching is good for you in so many ways, but that's not what my talk is about. Okay, so this is a picture. Sorry, Petal on Zoom, you can't see these.
It's not a lily.
No, it's not a lily.
It's an orchid.
It is an orchid. Oh, well done. Do you know what sort of an orchid it is? It's a wild orchid. Okay, it's called a butterfly orchid. Can you see how it's got two wings and a long body and a head? Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, it's not called a dragonfly. So this is just do an example of how beautiful plants are. And if you look really close up, you can see amazing things. So yeah, I've only ever seen a butterfly orchid twice, and this was the second time. First was right up on a very high walk. They like damp soil, only really flower in June. So I was very excited to see these on a walk in June, and a different kind of walk. I thought, wow, that's really lovely to see these, and I took lots of photographs of them. And I remembered again that verse about how beautiful nature is. Why do we worry about the things that we worry about when God looks after those? But we did the same walk 3 days later, and someone had trimmed them away. They had gone. Someone had made the wide path wider, so people could walk down it more freely. And all the butterfly orchids had been trimmed away. I was horrified, so I wrote a cross letter to the people who own the land. It happened to be the National Trust for Scotland. Can you believe it? So yeah, I tried to protect my lilies of the field in future by pointing out they really shouldn't have trimmed them down. And this is just a bit of an aside, but the planet is burning, as you know. We're in the middle of environmental crisis. The world is damaged, and we humans are the root cause of it. But nothing will happen unless we love it. And we can, all the politicians say all the words they like and do nothing. But unless you actually care about it, you won't do anything about it either. So I would encourage you to learn to love a patch of ground, a place in nature, because if you love it, you'll care for it. God will put that on your heart. And my first result was horror and distress at what happened to those, what just looked like insignificant plants, but I don't care, they were beautiful and they didn't deserve to be cut down. So learn to love the world, it needs us to love it. And then finally, when my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watches over my ways. That is Psalm 142, verse 3. Now, I think I might have shared this image before a long time ago. So this is a walk in what does look very much like wilderness, doesn't it? You can just see a bit of scrubby ground. The ground is quite boggy on either side of the path. You've got tall mountains. It is a proper wilderness walk, really. It's about a 10-mile walk that my husband and I like to do every now and then. And the first time we did it, you don't really know what's coming up on a walk when you do a walk the first time, do you? And this stretch is about 6-7 miles in, and you're already getting quite tired, quite frankly. And there's this just tiny, tiny woodland, moorland path that stretches on for what seems like an eternity, and it goes uphill. And then it goes slightly downhill, and then it goes uphill even longer. And it's a bit like this. You can just see the next bit, but you can't see the bit after it. So you keep thinking you might just be able to see the way ahead, and you can't. And that is just like life, really, isn't it? You can only see so far ahead. And sometimes you're on a path and you're not really convinced that it's particularly helpful and it's difficult and you can't see the way ahead at all. But what I didn't know was about after 2 miles of this stretch, getting wearier and wearier, suddenly the ground falls away and there is this spectacular view. I haven't put it on there because maybe one day you'll do this walk if you want to. I'm not going to spoil the surprise. There is just this awe-inspiring view of mountain after mountain after mountain. You reach a high point and it is astonishing. And the first time I did that walk, I thought, you just don't know what's at the end of a difficult path, do you? Sometimes there is the most amazing, glorious surprise. So persevere if life is rocky and hard and you can't see the next step. Sometimes not knowing what the next step is good because the next step is harder than the step we're on right now. But every now and then there is a really, really glorious view. So persevere. So final thought, get out in nature. See what God can say to you in it. Expect God to speak to you in it because he is there all the time in it. just waiting to surprise you, waiting to encourage you, waiting to show you that he cares about you and where you are and what you're doing.